Okay, I'm Bob Rubin. I'm co-chairman of the Council of Foreign Relations, and I welcome you to today's Russell C. Leffingwell Lecture with our distinguished guest, the President of Mexico, Enrique Peña Nieto, who I first met about 3 years ago. Before he was president, he came to my office and he said, "We're going to do all these wonderful things," and I said, "That seems very unlikely." Well, you've done them. So I was wrong. Where's Tom? Here he is. Let me thank Tom Leffingwell Pulling and his entire family for the generosity in endowing this annual lectureship. Let me also welcome CFR members from around the nation, and I even think from around the world, who are plugged in through live stream and through teleconference, and we'll hear from questions from them as we get to the Q&A at the end. In accordance with the Council practices, I will not recite from the President's resume, but as you can see from your materials, it is extraordinarily impressive. Let me make just one personal observation, if I may. I mentioned a moment ago that I'd had the opportunity to meet the President when he was just a candidate, and now all of us have had an opportunity to see what he has done. It is really quite remarkable how he and his team, his finance minister who had run his campaign, have made this congressional system, this presidential congressional system work for the first time really since it became a true democratic system when Ernesto Zedillo created the opportunity for real elections. It's been a remarkable accomplishment and in stark contrast to conditions in some other countries. So we are delighted to have you with us today, Mr. President, and to give us a better understanding of Mexico and also of how you have accomplished all that you have accomplished. We're going to begin with some framing remarks from the President. Then the President and I will have a conversation. I threatened Richard with my giving a 30-minute address, but he didn't seem to think that was going to be of much interest. So we will have a discussion, and then the President will respond to questions from participants. When you're called upon, please wait for the microphone, state your name, state your affiliation, and then keep your question relatively brief so that we can get in as many as possible. Also, for national members, you can email your questions to questions@cfr.org. And then when we finish, if you all would remain seated while the President leaves, that would be our appropriate procedure. Okay, with that, it is my honor and privilege to introduce the President of Mexico, Enrique Peña Nieto.
Thank you very much, Robert Rubin.
Let me say first that if you don't mind, we go to Spanish. I think I'll feel a little bit more comfortable if I speak in my own language and not to get a statement. I say, I'd like to do it, and I can even say it a little bit faster if I do it in English. However, I understand quite well English, so I take the questions you might have. I first say, muchas gracias, Robert Rubin.
Thank you very much, Robert Rubin, Richard Hess. I would like to thank all the members of the Council on Foreign Relations for this remarkable invitation to meet with all of the attendants to this event. And you have given me the opportunity to share what has happened in Mexico in the last 21 months. I would like to share with you what Robert Rubin made reference to. I would like to refer to important structural changes. I would like to note as well the important relationship that Mexico has with the United States. Before NAFTA and after NAFTA, we have built a relationship between the U.S. and Mexico, between Mexico and the U.S. We have been able to build an intense relationship with a growing trade growth. We have extended our relationship to other fields. We have been able to set a strong dialogue with President Obama administration. We have set a dialogue to review many areas, including security. We have tried to improve the infrastructure in the border. And let me tell you that this is the busiest border in the world, with 1 million crossings every day. More than 300,000 vehicles cross the border. We have a trade exchange that ranges around $1 million a minute. And being Mexico, the third top trade partner of the United States and the second destination of its exports, and being Mexico a country that buys to the United States more than all of the BRIC countries together, more than Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa together. That is how important it is for the United States. And the same, the U.S. is very important for Mexico because the U.S. is the top destination of our exports. On top of all of that, Mexico is a country with political stability. For many decades now, we have had political stability. I could say for a fact that it's 80 years that we have had political stability since 1934. Upon that precise date, every 6 years we have had. In every change of administration, we have had a stable and ordered transition. And not many countries, or many regions of the world, can state the same thing. Mexico has had this transition, and that's why we are strong. Let me tell you that in the last 20 years, we have made significant progress in the process of consolidating our democracy. We have made of Mexico a pluralistic and diverse country. And at Congress, in reference to what Robin Rubin said, we have managed to have a pluralistic Congress. Not a single political party by itself holds the majority. That is why we should recognize the merit that after having, since 1997, to be more precise, for roughly 20 years, if we would have managed to materialize an important structural reforms agenda with the unanimous support, almost unanimous support, and in some cases, the support of the majority to the reforms. We have managed to do that, and the reforms are oriented to several areas. We have one goal: to broaden the rights of Mexicans, and this is where we have the educational reform, the reform that amends the Amparo Law, the Act for Writs of Injunction, to address the acts of authority, and we have a standardized code of procedures applied nationwide. That is to say, all of the procedures in criminal settings, it doesn't matter in which state of Mexico the proceedings take place, the rules will be exactly the same. On the other side, on the other hand, we have modified and we have strengthened our democratic and political institutions. I would like to make reference to two important elements. First of all, for the first time ever, the Attorney General's office, the General Attorney's office, becomes independent. It is an autonomous agency from the executive branch. It has its own powers now. And additionally to this reform, of course, there are many other components to it, but I would like to note that we have set forth that democratically elected governments can now form coalition governments. And that is an incentive to the creation of agreements and to create governments in a presidential regime that could opt for coalitions. And thirdly, one of the third objectives in the structural reforms that probably you might be interested in this area the most. We have targeted the biggest challenge for Mexico in the last 3 decades, and that is to have more economic growth and to speed up our growth and make it sustainable. 6 reforms actually are oriented to this purpose. The labor reform that was passed before I came into office, a couple of days before, with the previous arrangements made, and I must have said before that we had been paving the way for it to create this climate in Mexico. Before I took office, the level of agreement was very positive, and then we managed to pass the labor reform to open up the labor market, to hire more youth, to hire more women that want to join the labor market. Afterwards, the educational reform happened, and this aims to broaden the rights of Mexicans, and this reform tries to raise the quality of education and to have more recognition to the merits, the professional merits of teachers, and teachers had to prove their skills in order to teach students throughout their career. We have a financial reform as well, that even that we have a sound economy, our financial institutions are sound as well. The level of credit in Mexico has shown to be low, and where credit concentrates the most favors large corporations and not companies. And the financial reform meant that we amended 34 laws. It is aimed to have more credit available and to have more competition between financial institutions so that the credit rates are lower, to make credit more affordable. A tax reform is not the most popular one, let me tell you, as it is a case of any country, but the tax reform gave the state more capabilities. Therefore, the budget for public investment grew. Starting in 2014, we have more budget for infrastructure, for education, for health, and for science and technology. Less expenditure for bureaucracy. Most investments will happen to make a more competitive country of our own. In sum, the tax reform decided to provide procedures and to set a more progressive tax regime to collect more taxes to all of those who have higher levels of income. Then, a reform happened in the area of economic competition to have a regulating agency that fights monopolistic practices, that advocates for competition in different areas of our economy. And we have a reform for a very relevant sector in our country, telecommunications, in order to open up this sector to have more competition that would, in result, provide benefits for Mexicans. And we start to see now the benefits of all of these reforms. And specifically, I have noted telecommunications reforms. There's more competition in the area of telephone services. And the last reform that is the most relevant one in this set of reforms, which is the energy reform, because with it, we changed and set up a new model to take advantage of our energy resources based on a model that had been used for roughly 70 years, and without a doubt, it was being overused in terms of how to take advantage of Mexican resources. But now, with the energy reform, the state will own its hydrocarbons, but at the same time, it sets the ground so that the private parties, the private sector, participate in the exploration and the exploitation of our energy resources. It incentivizes and promotes the use of cleaner energies, and this is just the groundwork for the energy reform. We're changing a paradigm. We're changing the model that we used to have for exploitation purposes. So these are the structural reforms that have taken place in Mexico in just 20 months. We have walked at a very speedy pace, and I appreciate Robert Rubin's reference to the major achievement that this represents for Mexico. In this time span, political forces, the top political forces, along with the government of Mexico, have been able to materialize these reforms. Some of them, we have discussed them, not as a candidate. I met him before I was running for office. A while ago, he asked me, well, I reminded him that it has been 3 years. I have been in New York in 3 years. And he said, what has happened in your life? Since then, I was a pre-candidate, I ran for office, I became the president of my country, and all of those reforms that we discussed were very important for us when we discussed them since, but now we have the reforms passed and are in the process of implementation. Our administration is working on it because now it's time to provide tangible results to the population. We have passed the reforms, but society demands that what we have set forth in the laws, in the reforms, have to be reflected in the standard of living of the population and the actual benefits that Mexican households can receive from the reforms. We're in that process. We're in the process of implementing at a speedy pace the reforms, and I'm sure that I'll receive many questions from you, and I hope that I can answer to your questions about the process of implementing the reforms. And on the other hand, the government, from the beginning of my administration, has worked on a very ambitious plan to extend the country's infrastructure in the area of highways, roads, ports, airports, railroads that are, of course, ambitious projects and in which we're working on. These are projects that would require an investment that goes over $500 billion, and in which, of course, spaces will open up for the participation of the private sector to develop these projects together. And I would like to wrap up this brief introduction to the conversation that we will have momentarily. I should have started saying this, let me tell you, because I try to share with you, and well, we have time over our shoulders because Ruben is very strict on time, and he told me that I have specific time for this introduction, but I should have mentioned the most important thing. What made it possible to have all of these reforms? I'm sure that you have heard about the Pacto por México, the Pact for Mexico, and this was a pact, an agreement that was built upon during the transition period. In the case of Mexico, it's a very lengthy transition that happens between you get elected and the moment you are sworn in and take office. It takes 5 months from July to December. So this is going to change in the future elections because that is part of the political reform. It will happen in 3 months. But in this 5-month span, we built a pact for Mexico that made it possible that on December the 2nd, one day after I took office, between the top political forces in Mexico and my administration, we were able to agree on the pact. But what makes it different? What does it stand out from it? It was not just a true sign of goodwill. It was, yes, a true sign of building a project, but we worked on an agenda that included the top topics to be addressed, all the reforms that needed to be passed, and all the structural changes needed. Beyond different approaches and each political party approach, we were able to define in very clear terms the substance of the agreement. And this shows the level of political maturity that we have in Mexico and how civil politicians are in Mexico in every group, central parties, left wing, right wing, all together. And this is how it happened. And based upon this agreement, we began implementing it at Congress. There was a quite extensive debate for each one of the reforms. And over the course of this month, we have been able to pass 11 structural reforms that I have described. This is how I would like to wrap up this intervention, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to appear before you and to, in a nutshell, describe what in a very brief time has happened in Mexico. Thank you very much.
Let me start, if I may, with this question, Mr. President. I first got involved in Mexico about 25 years ago. And I remember meeting business people and political people and thinking that they were just extraordinarily impressive. And I've had the feeling ever since that Mexico at some point would take off, but there was a lot that needed to be done. You've now done a lot of what needed to be done, albeit not all of it. As you look forward, and yet you don't have growth yet. I thought when these reforms were enacted, it might well create the kind of confidence that would spur growth. So I question, well, two related questions. One is, now that you've done all this, when do you think the effects are likely to begin to show in terms of actual growth? And secondly, what are the risks to growth that you think are greatest? And in that respect, let me pose two particularly. You still have, I think, about a 35% poverty rate or something like that, and an enormous inequality. It's always seemed to me that it was going to be hard to get sustained growth without being more effective in addressing that. And then, of course, you have the issues around law enforcement and the like, which are on everybody's mind. But I must say, having said that, I think there's a tremendous, I know, because I live in this little world of financial people, tremendous confidence in what you've done and a tremendous amount of interest in,
Thank you very much,
in
Robert.
Mexico.
Thank you very much. I believe that all of the reforms address the needs for Mexico. We need higher economic development. The greatest challenge in the area of economics and in social development is that we haven't reached a higher rate that has been recorded in the last 30 years, an average rate of 2.6%. And yes, it is positive. These are positive figures, but it's quite evident that we need to increase this rate more to have more social development and a better standard of living for Mexicans. Therefore, we needed the reforms. Right now, we are seeing signs of a better economy, more growth. Last year, according to the Autonomous Institute that generates figures in Mexico, the INEGI, our country grew by 1.4%. It is a figure under what we had expected and wished, but due to all the reasons that I have expressed and describing why it happened, the outlook for the closing of this year is 2.7% growth. And statistical figures about how our industry will grow, how jobs will grow, and our exports will grow are quite optimistic. We're going to reach that goal. The forecast for next year is 3.7%, based on all of the groundwork prepared for that to happen, and the reforms will boost our economy. It is clear that the implementation of the reforms will not happen overnight, and the effects of each one of the reforms will not happen overnight. Most of the benefits of these reforms, yes, are evident. People are starting to see the results, but it will take some time to see the full impact of the reforms, and eventually we'll see it reflected in how our economy will grow. We're seeing it. Next year, we will see the signs, and in the upcoming years, we're expecting to have a more expedited economic growth. And this is the same forecast that we see by financial analysts that know the Mexican economy. In the area of poverty, Robert, the big question here is what would make us reduce poverty and fight the roots of poverty to the core? I'm fully convinced that we have to grow in economic terms. We need a sustained growth. We need to have higher rates, and with a social policy, we need to find a way to allocate richness in a more qualitarian way. But if we fail to grow economically, there is no social policy enough to reverse poverty and marginalization that we see in certain sectors of society. What we have done so far, on the one hand, is to push these reforms forward to grow economically, and most of them are oriented to reach this goal. But on the other hand, we have revamped our social policies. We have social programs oriented to address the needs of the population, and we don't only want beneficiaries of social policy. We don't need a handout policy. We need to provide our policies a new phase to make sure that all of those beneficiaries of social policies, they need to become part of an income-generating activity. And for that to happen, we need to have more economic growth. I believe that if we work in tandem by implementing the reforms to have more economic growth, and on the other hand, we have an efficient social policy, I believe that we will revert poverty and we will show more economic growth.
That's, to me at least, sounds like a very sensible approach. As you look at the poor, Mr. President, you have a program, I've forgotten the name of it, but it's a cash outlay program to help us.
It used to be known as Oportunidades, now it's known as Prospera. It is not just that we have changed the name, we have changed the the purpose. It's to prosper. Prospera means to prosper, and that's what we want for people.
Does that involve working to equip people to enter the economic mainstream, to more effectively function in the economy?
That is right. The program will provide higher education. It will give grants for higher education studies, and previously this program used to cover high school all the way up to high school, and now the program extends for higher education grants. So all of those beneficiaries of this project can move on and go to college. And it also has training programs so individuals can join the labor market. These beneficiaries will receive skills to get a job, and this government program links the market sector and the beneficiaries. In other words, the scope of this project is bigger. The beneficiaries of the previous program, known Oportunidades, now known as Prospera, to prosper, the government tries to work hand in hand with them in their professional process to incorporate the labor market. We are providing them with the tools, but we are also helping them to join the labor market. And having that opportunity means that, and I must insist, we will set our economy in a more dynamic pace. That's the effort that we're thriving for.
Let me change directions a little bit, Mr. President. My impression is that, generally speaking, the United States government tends to pay a lot less attention to Latin America than it should, given the importance of Latin America to our country. But there are always other kinds of issues around the world, and they tend to be, the important sometimes gets pushed out by the immediate. What is your view of your relationship with the United States today, but particularly, what could our country, what would you like our country to do that we're not doing? And in general, are we more or less functioning in the ways that are constructive in your view, or there's other?
First and foremost, let me tell you that the relationship that the Mexican government has with the U.S. government is undergoing a very positive moment. We have built a very constructive climate. We have diversified our collaboration agenda, and it is not only targeting security and security matters. We do have cooperation in that arena, but we have projects for education, technological exchange, broadening up trade channels. We have diversified our agenda with the U.S. government. We have a very cordial and respectful relationship. Mexico, and this is my own personal belief, I believe that Mexico has been called upon to respond to this level of growth, to be more dynamic economically, and to develop its energy sector, to build more infrastructure. And along with the rest of North America, we want to make this region of the world a more competitive one, a more productive one. I believe that today the world is defined by what happens in specific regions. And when we talk about North America, we need to link ourselves better so we can create synergy. We need a joint effort to make this region a more competitive one. It is already competitive without a doubt. Specifically, the U.S. holds strengths. Its own context makes it a very competitive country, but I believe that if we recognize how interdependent the U.S. with its neighbors from the north and the south, we are part of NAFTA, a trade agreement, and we are interdependent more than many people believe. I believe that we will be able to generate a stronger synergy to carry out joint efforts to make this region a more competitive one. The development that Mexico will show in its energy sector, without a doubt, will make this region more competitive, and it adds up to what the U.S. has contributed to, specifically in the area of exploiting shale gas, and also to have inputs that are more affordable compared to other places in the world. And this is where we should target our efforts. We need to work in this space of mutual respect, but we have to link efforts and create synergies. We want a win-win situation for North America and each one of its components.
Oh, I think it's a very powerful vision. Shannon O'Neill, who some of you may know, is the Council's foreign relations expert on Mexico, and is terrific. Wrote a book about a year ago, Shannon, Two Nations Indivisible. And it is basically the vision that that President of Mexico just expressed. As you look forward, Mr. President, and you've asked, I presume, your Minister of Finance and others to think about not just next year but longer term, what do they think a sustainable long-term rate of growth might be for Mexico? Or perhaps they haven't gotten to the point yet where they've focused on trying to project that.
Hay previsiones que están hechas por los
There are
analistas,
forecasts made by analysts, and these are the figures that I would share with you, but the growth
que hacen hoy ya
outlook
distintas
that started to show
casas de análisis
the
financieros y
differences that
económicos
different institutions
apuntan a que
have made
México
point out to
estará
the fact that
teniendo
Mexico
un acelerado
will
crecimiento
show an accelerated growth in its economy. 2.7 is around 2.7. This is the forecast that the government is using by the closing of this year. 3.7 for next year, reaching 4% or probably more in upcoming years. And it is estimated, according to different studies, to range around 5 to 6% in the last 2 years of this administration and the upcoming years. I believe that all the reforms that have been implemented and the actual enactment of these reforms are the groundwork to reach this level of growth in our economy. That is how we're going to expand our economy and make it a sustainable growth. And this is going to result in benefits for Mexicans.
And Americans, in my opinion. No, I really do. I think your vision is a right one. I'll ask one more question, then we'll turn it over to the participants. As you look at that prospect, Mr. President, what do you think the chief risks might be to your accomplishing the purposes that you've just outlined, and how would you envision responding to those risks, and do you have the political ability still to move forward as you have so effectively?
I believe that more than risks, I believe that there is a big challenge that Mexico faces in the process of implementing its reforms, specifically due to the fact that we are going to venture into the energy field. We're going to venture into areas that until this moment were unexplored in our country. We're breaking with the paradigm. I believe that we should have done this before. Many countries had done this before in the area of energy. And we are late, but eventually we decided to give that step forward. We decided to change our development model to exploit our energy industry. Basically, we decided to boost an energy industry for the benefit of our country. And we decided to use a new model, and that is venturing into a completely new field for Mexico. Therefore, the government is open to listen, to learn from success stories that companies have and governments have experienced in other places in the world. And we are open to receive feedback so we can draft policy that helps us implement the reforms the right way. More than a risk, I see a great opportunity ahead of us. Yes, it is a challenge, but it's an opportunity at the same time. We have to show that Mexico can step up to the plate, and I'm convinced that we are fully capable of achieving something as big as we have set out to do, and we have the groundwork, and those are the structural reforms. This is the great opportunity that we have ahead of us, and for the government, we have to expedite our actions, we have to act timely, and we're going to speed up the pace in the process of implementation so the benefits are reflected for the benefit of Mexicans. I would like, Robert, if you allow me, I would like to touch on specifically the energy reform. We have created all the governing agencies for the implementation of the energy reform. We have approved the agencies that will be in charge, as well as the members that will be part of these agencies, the commissioners, all the institutions that will be in charge of implementing the energy reform. All of them need to be appointed and presented to the Senate and be approved by the majority. And all of these appointments, let me tell you, just 1 week ago, they were approved. All the agencies have been created. The heads of those agencies have been appointed, even before the deadline stated in the reform. We are ahead of ourselves, and the Senate has endorsed the appointments so we can have the agencies that will regulate the implementation ready. We have worked on the round zero. These are the fields for exploration and exploration now as exploitation and exploration. This is what Pemex will have ownership of and will exploit in the upcoming years. And preliminarily, we have disclosed the fields that will be open to exploration and exploitation activities that will be open for bids, and will the call for bids will happen in the first semester of next year, and this is called as round one. But these fields have been disclosed so that all of the stakeholders interested from the private sector can start planning, can learn from the fields, and can know where the bids will take place.
Good. President, thank you. Why don't we open this up to, I had a feeling this would be the case. There will be a lot of people who have a lot of questions they would like to ask. We'll start right here. Yes, ma'am.
I thought
And by the way,
was it.
if you would, ask your questions in English so that we can
Yes.
all understand them and then they can be translated.
My name's Lucy Commissar. I'm a journalist. I think Mexico has a problem similar to the U.S., which is sometimes individuals with huge amounts of money use that money to buy influence, buy politicians, buy policy. You have an individual called Carlos Slim, and he has had a monopoly on the phone system in Mexico, which hurts mostly the people at the bottom because it takes more of their disposable income, and some
make a
can't
suggestion,
afford
ma'am?
phones at all.
Yeah.
Why has this been allowed to continue? Are you going to stop it so he doesn't have a monopoly or even a dominant position in the telephone system?
That's your nickel. This is why it's good to be president. You get to answer questions.
Well, let me tell you, the reforms that have been enacted, there's one specifically, and of course relates to your question, and that is the telecommunications reform. And that is is not oriented for just one person or a company. These reforms are overarching. This reform sets forth new rules for this sector to make it more competitive. And upon the enactment of the telecommunications reform, the company Telmex announced that they would divide the company because they were declared a dominant company in the telecommunications sector. The agency in charge of competition, they determined that they were a dominant stakeholder, and therefore the scope of the telecommunications reform and also the economic competition reform is precisely that, to incentivize more competition, and you have shared concern yourself. So the answer is there in the reform that we have enacted and what will come after it's implemented, and that is to have more companies offering telephone services, ground lines, television services, and the government will also open the bid for 2 more broadcasters. And the process has just started, and it would finish by early next year. We're going to bid 2 more television broadcasters. So this is how we have been implementing the telecommunications reform.
Yes, sir. I should just add, it's interesting, when this reform was enacted, one of the comments in Mexico were that great credit to the president for taking on something that was opposed by, I happen not to have quite the same view of Carlos Slim you do, but that took on the power of Carlos Slim, and he got a great deal of credit for having done that. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, my name is Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch. I wanted to first of all congratulate you on the greater transparency you've brought to the horrible violence in connection with the drug war. And I wanted to ask you, federal authorities have said that there are 22,000 disappearances. Are those just people who are missing or people who were forcibly disappeared by security forces? And with respect to your predecessor, President Calderon, the numbers given are that those have reduced, the number disappeared from 29,000 to 12,000. Are those, that reduction of 17,000, are those people who were found alive or dead?
Listen, let me tell you that security is a top priority for my administration, and the law enforcement and security policy being implemented, it's fully aware of the full respect of human rights. And the General Attorney's Office has created a specific unit to review the number of individuals that allegedly have disappeared. And yes, we have seen changes in the figures because we have carried out a thorough all of the information available about these missing individuals. Of course, as some, as you said, were missing, some others not necessarily were disappeared. They were just not present. They were found, and when a missing person report happens, in the case of the claimant, they do not report back when that person comes back home. Therefore, the Attorney General's office carried out a thorough review of those claims of missing people, and they have created a specific unit to address the reports of missing individuals. I don't have with me, and please let me get back to you. I'll give you the exact figures that the General Attorney's Office has of all of the reports of missing people and the update of all of the other cases. And I would like to note that if we have made a difference in the area of law enforcement policy and security policy, I could make reference to two. We have paid full respect to human rights. The National Commission for Human Rights has acknowledged that the number of reports has dropped. Let's say the alleged abuses of authority in the enforcement of the law. We have seen a drop in that. And we have also seen a reduction in violence. The recently published figures in the first quarter of this year, we can see, and even the strongest detractors have acknowledged that we have seen a drop of 29% of the rate of murder in the whole country in the first semester of 2014 compared to 2012 figures. And that is an encouraging figure. And we believe that our security policies are showing good results, and the path that we have decided to walk, we are in the process of generating peace of mind and peace for Mexico.
We'll go over to this side. Yes, sir. There you go.
As Mexico succeeds in its integration as part of the North American moment, or the two countries indivisible, how do you see the role that you play with the rest of Latin America? What would you like it to be, and do you see that affecting it at all?
Well, Mexico is one of the most open economies you can find in the world. Mexico has decided to be an open economy, and Mexico is considered the fifth most open economy in the G20 countries, and that is why. That is why we have considered to develop our economy using this component. That is why we have tried to integrate with North America. We have decided to integrate with Latin America as well. I would like to note the creation of the Pacific Alliance. In this framework, this is an integration mechanism conformed by 4 countries which share political principles, economic principles, like trade liberalization, and also it generates a market around 220 million inhabitants. This is an agreement. This is a young mechanism. It was created only 3 years ago, and it is going to bear fruit very soon as all the Congresses approve the agreement that was recently agreed between the 4 member countries, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. This is an open mechanism. This is a trade integration mechanism that it's open. And eventually, all of those who share the same economic principles as the member countries will eventually can be part of the Pacific Alliance. I believe that Mexico geographically is located in a privileged position. We serve as the meeting point with North America and the rest of Latin America. Therefore, we are interested and that my administration is pushing forward through the reforms that I have mentioned. We want to make Mexico a logistic destination that provides high added value, and we want to make integration happen in Latin America, in all the Latin American region, and we want to integrate with North America as well through it.
We'll go, yes, sir.
Nelson Cunningham with McClarty Associates. A related question. You spoke mostly about the economic principles in which Mexico could be a leader and integrate with Latin America, and certainly that is the case. There are many Latin American countries where the principal issues are not necessarily economic, but are human rights, democracy, openness, transparency. What can Mexico do as a leader in Latin America to help by its example or more directly to show these countries the benefits of the openness that Mexico has embraced?
In terms of our foreign policy, one of the main goals that we decided to set right from the beginning of my administration is to be globally engaged. And in our globally engagement goal, we want to be more present and integrate with Latin America. We had lost a space, we had lost our presence and our participation. We have kept up with it, and now as parts of the Pacific Alliance, we are working together to collaborate with other countries in Latin America and also the Caribbean, and we are more present with these countries. But what Mexico can do is to exchange success stories. Mexico is in the process of becoming a more modern country. We are building our capacities in the area of democracy. As I said, we have a reform targeted to that in the area of transparency as well. I didn't mention, but the transparency reform is another reform that adds up to the political reform that we have passed to create a robust transparency system. But Mexico shares all of its expertise, and Mexico is trying to outreach to all of our sister countries in the Latin American region as well as in the Caribbean. We're trying to set a climate of synergy with all of them, and by this we will be able to promote in this region a higher level of support. Mexico can work on having a more supportive region, but we can also help to foster development. And I'm making reference to Central America and the Caribbean, where the absence of development, of course, affects areas. It of course affects these countries domestically, but also affects Latin America as a whole.
Mr. President, I think they could keep going all day as we could. Well, I'm told we
Don't
have time
worry.
for, your staff, I think, is worried, actually. We have time for one more question, and what I'm going to do is ask a question that came in from a national member from California. And his question was, in the context of what really is a remarkable set of accomplishments that you've outlined and the prospects that Mexico may realize now with the potential that it has, how do you plan to deal with the question of drug cartels and crime more generally?
Well, as I have noted already, truth be told, security is a top priority for the Mexican state. We had made progress. I have shared with you figures that have been accepted and have been recognized in our country, even by the most critical sectors, and they are the most involved in the security issue, civil society organizations, and they have observed the developments that have taken place in Mexico, and we have seen encouraging figures. And in the area of cartels, well, cartels are present transnationally, and we have to create a common front, especially the countries with we exchange information, and we do that with the Pacific Alliance countries. We exchange information with Central American countries, specifically with our neighboring countries in the south, and that is also happening with the United States, because these cartels, of course, they do not only operate in one country, they are present transnationally. But it is a fact that we have
con eficiencia.
acted efficiently,
Puedo decir
and I can
lo que
say,
también es reconocido,
and
de
it has
122
been acknowledged as well,
personas identificadas
out of 122 targets, the heads of the cartels, now during my administration, 88 have been arrested, others have been shot, but they are no longer a peril for society. So this has resulted in the cracking down process of these cartels. We see the emergence of other organizations within these cartels, and they perpetrate crimes in specific regions of the country. We have addressed specifically the regions where we have identified extortions, kidnapping for ransom. We saw at the beginning of this year a spike of these cases, but we had to decide on specific policies for security in that specific region of our country. And today we see a downward trend in the perpetration of this crime. We cannot take on a triumphalistic approach vis-a-vis organized criminal activities. We have to reaffirm instead that this is a priority for my administration, that we are making progress in terms of fighting crime, and the figures that we see are encouraging. But still, we know that we're on the right path. Yes, violence is coming down in the country, specifically in those regions that were hit hard by insecurity. And I've shared with you a figure. We've seen violence coming down, and the number of murders have dropped down by 29% in contrast to 2012 figures. We see that there are states in the northern border with the United States and in the southern border states, in the south border. Yes, there were moments where crime was pretty bad. In Monterrey, for example, we have seen a 60% drop in Monterrey. In Ciudad Juarez, we have a 50% drop of these crimes. In Coahuila as well, roughly 50% is the figure. On average, in the border states with the United States, violence and murders perpetrated there have dropped by more than 40%. But this doesn't mean, I will say it again, we don't want to sound triumphalistic, and we don't want to show off that the problem has been solved. It is not that we want to show off. Of course not. Security is going to be a priority of the Mexican state. It will be a priority of the government of Mexico, and the figures, yes, are encouraging, but we're on the right path.
Mr. President, Mexico is very fortunate to have you as its president. We are very fortunate that you visited with us, and we hope you will visit with us again when you are in New York. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert.